Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Legislative Forum. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director of CPC, here with State Auditor Mike Harmon to talk about the Office of Unemployment Insurance and other doings in the office. Mike, welcome.
Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Hey, we appreciate what you're doing in the Office of State Auditor. I'm just wondering, even as I begin this, how many people really understand what your office does? Why don't we start with that?
Sure.
What does the state auditor do?
Sure. Well, the state auditor is actually kind of the guardrails and the watchdog for the taxpayers. I have a joke with Allison Ball, our treasurer. She always talks about being the watchdog, and I talk about being the watchdog. And I said, well, Allison, you're really the watchdog on the front end. We're the watchdog on the back end, and together we've got your dog covered. So, but yeah, a lot of people think we're like, we audit like the sales tax of people paying, or maybe we're like the IRS. We're not. We're actually your auditor. We are the auditor for the people because we make sure that government stays efficient, effective, and ethical.
Very good. In fact, I'm just looking at the statement here. You ensure that public resources are protected, accurately valued, properly accounted for, and effectively employed to raise the quality of life of Kentuckians. So that's a big undertaking.
It is.
That must mean you have a pretty big staff. How big is the Office of Auditor?
We've got probably, depending on the timing, anywhere from 130, 135 individuals. We fluctuate a little bit, but we stay pretty busy. We do about 600 audits a year. We do everything from fiscal courts to sheriffs, county clerks. We do one of the things we'll talk about here in just a little bit. We do some statewide audits. We do an audit of the CAFR, which is the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and as well as we release what we call the SWAC Volume 1, SWAC Volume 2.
How do you decide which entities to audit? Because there are so many governmental and quasi-governmental entities across the state. With a team of just over 130, you cannot get to everyone every year. So how do you determine who's going to be audited?
Sure. Well, there are certain things that we have that we are statutorily required to audit, and then beyond that, like for fiscal courts specifically, sometimes we don't have sufficient staff to be able to audit those every year. They still have to have an audit every year. So what we do is sometimes if they'll send in a request, we will allow them to get a CPA. We still review the CPA's work. We still make sure that it's following our audit guide, but we do stay busy. Now on other items, a lot of times we'll do what's known as special exams, and we can go a little bit more in depth. Most of the stuff, the majority of the stuff that we do typically is what's known as a financial statement audit, and those are the things that are usually statutorily required.
Okay, very good. Sounds like you've got a busy office, a big task, a large undertaking, and you're busy essentially making sure that Kentuckians' tax dollars are being efficiently and rightly used.
Correct.
Which brings us to perhaps one of the biggest issues regarding state government that goes back to last year when Governor Beshear ordered a shutdown for a significant part of the economy. Many Kentuckians were put out of work.
Correct.
So they applied to the Office of Unemployment Insurance to get unemployment, which this is a safety net for those who lose their jobs unexpectedly. But when you recently did an audit, you had some very interesting findings, one of which was, actually there's 25 findings according to this report I'm looking at. Half of those findings in this audit of the state of Kentucky deal with the Office of Unemployment Insurance and the UI fund. One of those findings, a very significant finding, is that you found that Office of Unemployment Insurance, that the leadership made decisions that violated federal law and that they sacrificed program integrity by instituting systems aimed to speed up payments to the unemployed. Tell us more about that.
Sure.
How did you find that, by the way?
Well, they implemented a system called autopay, and I'm sure it was very well intended. In about mid-March, we had almost 50,000. 1 week we had almost 50,000 unemployment claims, new claims, and then the following week we had, I think it was like well over 113,000. So they were just getting inundated, but they knew they needed to get this unemployment out, and it was probably well intended. But what happened was they took off key controls, and anytime you take key controls off items, it leaves them more subject to fraud. And as you can see now, and I'm not sure if it's because of that or others, but we are seeing a lot of different fraud claims. One of those key controls that they took off was verifying other income that you might have.
Okay.
So, for instance, we believed that there were some Commonwealth of Kentucky employees that were receiving unemployment, even though they were still full-time employed, even though they were still receiving a paycheck. So we did a sample of 37 of those, and what we found was that there were 16 of those employees that received both the traditional unemployment as well as the federal enhancement. So even though they were still currently employed. Now, what had happened was they were Commonwealth employed, but they also had a part-time job. They lost their part-time job. And as you recall, the governor and many others were saying, if you've lost any income, apply for unemployment, apply for unemployment. And of those 37, we found that there was an overpayment of about $116,000. But that was just a sample.
A very small sample, too.
Yes.
37 state employees, and
Yes.
it was hundreds of thousands. What is the total number of Kentuckians that did apply for unemployment that we know of? And I know that's kind of there's uncertainty there because a lot of people applied, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Right.
But what was the number that eventually had a claim processed? Do we know?
I don't have that number right on the tip of my tongue. It seems like at one time upwards of 40% of the state had applied for, that's not inclusive in our report, but it seems like at one time that number. Our report, you were talking about some of those that were still, as of October, there were still 80,000 new claims that had not yet to be processed, which was great concern. And one of the reasons why we had a qualified opinion when we did our audit of the CAFR, which is incorporated into the statewide single audit of Kentucky, because they had no idea how much they owed, still left out at the time that they closed out the fiscal year.
One of the most alarming findings, according to you, that you found was that there were 400, and I don't know if alarming is the exact word, but it was an area of concern.
Broke my heart. Broke my heart that there were well over 400,000 unread, and it could be more.
Yeah.
That 400,000 was just what we made up, 400,000 unread emails that were just archived. And this was at a time when people still are picking up the phone, trying to get through. Nobody's answering. If they do get through to somebody, or if they get through like to their state legislator or something, they're being told to send an email to this particular email address, this assistant, and yet they just took them.
So let's talk about for those who are not tech savvy or into email, what happened? Archived.
It just makes, they went unread, and they just went ahead and set them aside.
So these were workers in the Office of Unemployment Insurance that received an email, and they hit the archive button, but they did not look at them. There was no response to these emails.
Correct.
400,000 Kentuckians.
Plus 400,000. And I will say this, that, according to our information in our review, I think initially they were trying to prioritize and get to them. They just didn't, and then they went ahead and archived them. The thing that's also sad about this, the General Assembly, early on when this first hit, I know the governor talks about them being overwhelmed, but the General Assembly offered 100 plus LRC staff, and yet still they refused to take them. And I know they said there was, some confidentiality concerns, but it doesn't take, these people deal with things every day, and you could have definitely had them sign a confidentiality form.
When you learned of that, and you did mention this in the opinion piece, that there were at least 100 state workers that were ready and willing to help.
Right.
You said that it caused you to pause, but
Sure.
were you able to talk to the governor at all, or any of his staff, about utilizing those state workers that could have helped?
Not directly, no. And we had heard about that, shortly into it, and that's why I did mention it. But it does. It makes me wonder why in the world they wouldn't. Why would you refuse help when you say you're overwhelmed? Why would you refuse that help?
Yeah, and I think that was a frustration that legislative leaders in both the House and Senate had. They were very clear that we're in a crisis. We're in it together. Right. It's not a partisan crisis. It's not a Republican or Democrat, but it's a state crisis that's affecting real Kentuckians who are suffering right now.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that was a disappointment. What has your office learned during this shutdown, large shutdown of our economy, and then with the Office of Unemployment Insurance in particular, the demand that was placed on that office, the real needs of Kentuckians? Were there a few takeaways that you had from as far as, and let me narrow that down.
Sure.
To how government could have responded more efficiently.
Yeah, well, and I know the governor indicated that there was the computer systems were a little archaic, they were a little older, and that is true. And there was some staff that had been pulled back, and of course, I think he tried to put the blame on Bevan, but it actually some of that started, in his father's term as well. But even if you have the best computer system, and even if you have the best of staff, if you take those controls off, you're still going to have problems. You're still going to have, a situation where fraud can occur, or even someone, in the case of the state employees, they may have very well have applied with the best of intent, but with those controls off, they weren't confirming if they had other income, so they just made an assumption that they were supposed to get it.
I'm sure there's other takeaways too.
Sure.
Mike, but and we'll be learning more as this unfolds. There's still a lot that we're learning. One of the findings that you had when you audited the Office of Unemployment Insurance was that that office could not provide accurate estimates of yet to be paid claims, and they provided insufficient and improper documentation for their estimates. Are they going to be required to fix that documentation to justify what they did?
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened was early on, typically in a normal year, when they close out the fiscal year, June 30th, in this case, June 30th to 20, within the month's time, they usually have settled all the, claims. Well, there were still, as indicated, about 80,000 claims. And initially, they didn't even know they were supposed to fill out this form that said, how much do you estimate, accounts payable, basically, still. And so once they knew they had to fill it out, it filled out anything from 89 million, and then we would ask a question, and it would get it. So it ranged anywhere from 89 million to 2 billion. So that's a pretty broad range.
Pretty big range when you're dealing with public tax dollars.
Correct. And every time we would bring it, and they did not have confidence in their number. And if they don't have confidence in their number, as auditors, we're going to follow the data, as I always say,
right.
And we're not going to have confidence. Matter of fact, it actually caused us on our audit of the CAFR, which was, like I said, incorporated into the SWAC, have a qualified opinion, which is really one of the, I'm talking accounting lingo, but you basically have a clean audit, qualified, or disclaimed, and that's kind of the middle of the road. That is the first time our state, in my recollection, and I know, probably at least in the last 34 years or more, has had a qualified opinion. So that caused you to pause as well.
Very good. If you're just joining us, I'm Richard Nelson, CPC's Executive Director, here with Kentucky State Auditor Mike Harmon. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Jason, let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner! Go?
Excellent. Soccer is fun. Yeah, I saw you guys out there. We're the family. We're the family.
Yeah!
Oh, I thought you were on my team.
Hi, Richard Nelson here with the Commonwealth Policy Center. If you're feeling frustrated over the direction of our nation, the leadership in Washington, D.C., the Equality Act, don't stay in your frustration. Do something about it. Get plugged into the Commonwealth Policy Center. Go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. Be informed, be encouraged, sign up now. Go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org.
My mother was always very familiar with her neighborhood, but one day she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual, and she didn't know whether she should go forward or turn, and she wasn't even really sure where she was at. It was very unsettling for her.
I felt so much better after my son told me, "Mom, I don't want you to worry or be afraid. I'll be there for you, and we'll figure it out."
Welcome back to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Legislative Forum, and I'm Richard Nelson here with Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor. Mike, I appreciate you joining us and giving us an update on your work in the State Auditor's Department. I'm not a numbers person. I know numbers are important. Kentuckians who care about the efficiency of the state and care about accountability with their tax dollars should be happy to know that you're hard at work with your team of over 130 staff members from across, located across the state, that you're working hard to bring about transparency, accountability. You're doing 600 some audits a year. And then when it comes to major issues like the Office of Unemployment Insurance, you've been very involved with that. What are you hearing from the public? Does the public, I should say, do they contact your office? Do they ask you about what's going on with that office and with OUI in particular?
They do. As a matter of fact, of course, prior to being auditor, I was 13 years in the Kentucky General Assembly. And, so I was not unaccustomed to people reaching out for constituent services. And that's some of the biggest frustration, and they're still having those frustration is, when I was in the House, if someone had a question or concern, they'd reach out to me and I'd try to get it resolved. Well, we had constituent services did a great job, but even on the issues that they couldn't resolve, the fact that someone was able to listen to them, they had a live voice, not just an automated machine telling them they were going to call them back and they never did, from that standpoint. So we have had people reach out to us, and the more we have reports on the Office of Unemployment Insurance, people are reaching out to us either, and it's multiple people who still been trying to get their unemployment insurance for months, but there's also people that are getting 1099s that never received any, unemployment concern about the fraud aspect of it. And that's the new phase that we're getting into now. But you still have tons of people that have not received their payments. And, people are having to move in with parents, people are losing homes, people, have to look their kids in the face and, and say, sorry, we can't do this or that.
So along the lines of what you just said, in your recent opinion piece and your findings with OUI, you said this: Governor Beshear, thousands of Kentuckians are counting on you. And then you go on to say, Governor, you are still getting paid. I am still getting paid. The employees of this Commonwealth are still getting paid. The time has long since passed that our neighbors who are hurting get paid what they are due.
Exactly.
Have you heard from the governor's office after you've said that? Those are
right.
I know you personally, and I know that you're not confrontational, looking for a fight. Just to have a fight. But you're hearing from people across the state, as you just mentioned, and you're trying to get this memo to the governor. I'm sure he has heard this as well.
I'm sure he's heard of it. But
what can your office do to help him or work with the governor? Maybe you're just two totally separate entities and you can't, but I'm wondering, there seems to be a commonality. There are people trying to work with the governor, legislative leaders, yourself.
Right, and I think if you go to the end of that op-ed that we wrote, I hope the governor can succeed in getting the unemployment straightened out. People who are supposed to get unemployment get it. People who got a 1099 that weren't supposed to because they didn't get income can get that resolved, because the governor's success is our people's success.
That's right.
But at the same time, from our standpoint, we've been a resource to the General Assembly when they have questions. Sadly, the governor, now there's certain things we have to do to make sure we maintain, our independence when it comes to auditing them. But even in our audit reports, we make recommendations, and hopefully they follow those recommendations. And, from a standpoint, but no, the governor has not been, from a standpoint of working well with others, from a standpoint of reaching out either to the General Assembly or to the business community, try to work with people.
So in case he's tuning in, or somebody from his staff that's tuning in, there's an open invitation for you to talk and get together.
Yes, we would be happy to talk, and I think it would be great if he pulled in, the legislative leaders and, of course, your constitutional officers. We would be happy to sit down and try to come up with solutions.
I want to go back to one other point. I think I just got one other point on the OUI, Office of Unemployment Insurance. You found this, that state law requires that the Auditor of Public Accounts be notified within 72 hours of a data breach.
Right.
OUI failed to notify your office of 3 data breaches in April and May of 2020.
Yeah.
And they claimed, Office of Unemployment Insurance claimed that they fixed the problem, but when another similar breach happened in May, they did not notify your office for 2 months.
Right.
This is troubling in our digital age where so much of our information is out there and
Yes.
easily obtained from others. If they hack into a system or something is exposed where somebody could get to it, that's a real concern when there's a data breach, especially highly personal information.
Well, what's even worse is, and I'm not sure if we put this in the actual audit, but we did not, there's a statutory duty for them to tell us of a breach within 72 hours. Actually, the previous auditor championed that bill, and I voted for it when it was in the House. But we did not actually get the official notification. We kind of knew through the grapevine, but we got the official notification after he had told the press one day when basically the AG had reached out and was asking the governor's office about some of these breaches that they went to the AG when they failed to notify.
So they knew about it beforehand, but they didn't release that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, what I'm saying is that they did not give us the official notification until such time that they were talking to the press one day, and we got the official notification within, I don't know, less than 24 hours, but the breach had occurred a month earlier.
Mike, I want to ask you this. What are the consequences for something like this? There were several findings that you had that were very problematic.
Right.
Some that were criminal. I guess that's the term. They broke the law. I mean, I don't know what other word to put in here, but a data breach and them not reporting as they're supposed to report. What are the consequences?
From the federal standpoint, there are certain federal statutes that they are supposed to comply with. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's criminal in the sense that someone's going to go to jail, but it does mean that they are violating those statutes, and it could have consequences, on future funds or grants.
Thanks for correcting, because there's a difference between criminal and then not following a statute.
Correct.
But usually there are consequences, though, when somebody doesn't follow the law.
Correct.
And so,
not always, but from the standpoint of if it's a continued problem, then certainly they can be held accountable in other ways.
So will there be any accountability for the OUI?
That's hard to say. I mean, most of that from that standpoint would be from a federal standpoint. The accountability that we are seeking is to make sure that that the Office of Unemployment Insurance gets these claims correctly processed, make sure that the people who are supposed to get their unemployment get it, and the people who are not supposed to get it do not get it, and to those that have filed fraudulent claims that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
What's your recommendation for a Kentuckian who has not gotten their unemployment check that's owed it? What's your recommendation to them?
A couple of things. There is certainly you can reach out to your state representative and state senator. They have a little bit of better opportunity to break through the noise. A lot of people are reaching out to our office, and we can actually forward that to. We have an Office of Unemployment contact that we can get that information to them. So there's multiple ways to do it. But the big thing is don't give up. Don't give up hope, because so many times it's we jokingly say it about insurance aid, but our insurance that so many times you try to get it and they try not to pay it. I'm not saying they're not trying to pay it, but they're so overwhelmed. They're so overwhelmed. So don't give up hope. Keep trying.
So call your state representative or state senator. They're probably the first line, because they are your advocate. They're your advocate when it comes to state government here in Kentucky. That number, by the way, if you want to leave a message for your legislator and don't know it offhand, it's 800-372-7181, 800-372-7181. Call them, share a message. It's a receptionist that will take your message, and your legislator will get back to you. They're very good about returning calls.
They are very good, yeah.
I want to, in the last few minutes here, Mike, I'd like us to talk about a broader approach, or broader questions, I guess. When you find an accounting problem with a government agency, does your office make recommendations to approve accountability? What does that look like?
Part of it is we make recommendations about things that they can do, and there are recommendations in the statewide single audit of Kentucky. We certainly hope that they will follow those. And then, beyond that, it's just normal good government, normal making sure you have proper controls in place, making sure that you're following the laws to the full extent. And sometimes, I'm not saying in this extent, but sometimes, especially some of your counties and local governments, they don't have sufficient people, so they're not always aware of everything. So sometimes we're the guardrails to help keep them, making sure the tax dollars are being paid, used efficiently, effectively, and ethically.
So, and that was leading into my next question, efficiency.
Yes.
Kentuckians are concerned about efficient government.
Exactly.
When you make a call, you want somebody to answer. If you leave a message, if they're not available, you want that message returned. Correct. Or that call returned. But what does your office do on efficiency? Are there things that you can do in the Auditor of Public Accounts office to increase efficiency? And here's the context. I'll give an example.
Sure.
The U.S. Postal Service right now is under fire for having gross inefficiencies in place.
Right.
NPR just recently did a story on this of inefficiencies that were kind of mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. Not kind of, they were mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I think everybody wants, as citizens, we want our government to succeed. We want the post office to succeed, but we want efficiency too. So tell us about your efficiency measures.
From a standpoint, we don't necessarily do what's known as like a performance audit. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is if you are following the laws, we help you follow the laws. If you are making sure that you have proper controls in place, because some of the biggest problems you have, and we've heard the governor talk about it. They said of what the claims that they have left, several hundred, thousand. I forgot what they said just recently, 80 or 100. It was 80 when we had it, but about 50% of them they believe are fraud. Yeah. Well, if you've gotten a lot of fraud, well, that's going to you're going to be less efficient because you're trying to get the fraud cleaned up before you can get everybody else paid.
Yeah.
So there's multiple things that we can do, but as long as you're running a clean ship, it's amazing how many times those individuals have an efficient office year after year after year.
That's good. We've got just about a minute.
Okay.
And your term, Mike, expires in 2023.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations? There's two real quick questions. Any recommendations for the next auditor and then your future plans?
The next auditor, I would just hope that they would continue what we have done. When I first came into the office, I told all our auditors we're not going to target anyone. We're not going to give anybody a pass. We're just going to follow the data. Doesn't matter whether Republican, Democrat, Independent. We're going to make sure that we follow the data. And as for future for me, I know the rumors are already out there. There's been some reporting of it. I'm leaning extremely heavy running to governor. In all likelihood, I will. I have not finalized any of that, but that's probably the direction I'm going to head.
Is there a time frame when we could expect an official word from you?
I would hope to make an official decision sometime this year and file a letter of intent and then just begin the process from there.
Very good. State Auditor Mike Harmon, thank you so much for joining me and our legislative forum.
Thank you.